So we'll take a minute and set our motivation. And so think that may our potential become clearer and clearer to us. May our potential be something we develop into. And may all of this go towards being of benefit to both self and others. Mahamunaye Soha Tayata Mune Mune Mahamunaye Soha Tayata Mune Mune Mahamunaye Soha. And allow yourself to reconnect with that motivation. And today we're going to do some review exercises just to make sure we haven't lost anyone along the way, and to keep steady some of the main terms that we've gone through. And hopefully that means that when they come up in future, you won't feel lost. And even if you don't remember all the terms, you'll remember where they live and where you can look up in future so that you don't get lost in the future. So we're going to start with an exercise, and it's going to be a little bit like the other day. So this is a review exercise that's completely anonymous and is a way for us to make sure that we're connecting with the main points. So again, this is completely anonymous, so please do answer, even if you're not totally sure, because it will help me understand what was clear and what wasn't clear, and it'll help you understand what was clear and what wasn't clear. So do you guys see that poll on your screen? Somebody nod. What categories of Buddhist teachings are talking about the path, what to practice, and the ways to practice? A, the two truths, conventional truth and ultimate truth. B, the two accumulations, merit and wisdom. C, the two results, form bodies and wisdom bodies. Which one is talking about the path? And then 2, what categories of Buddhist teachings are talking about the basis, how everything exists? A, the two truths. B, the two accumulations. C, the two results. How things exist, Buddhist science. Just your best guess. What categories of Buddhist teachings are talking about the result of having understood the way things exist and then having practiced accordingly? A, conventional truth and ultimate truth. B, merit and wisdom. C, form body and wisdom body. The result. When a Sangha finally saw Maitreya Buddha and received the teachings on Buddha potential, what was he doing? Was he meditating intensely in his cave after many years? Was he leaning down to use his tongue to move the maggots out of the wound of the injured dog? Was he asking for divine intervention? Was he studying the traditional texts of logic, reasoning, meditation techniques, etc.? What was a Sangha doing when he finally received the teachings on Buddha potential? Five, which of the sutra perspective 5 families has the least amount of concern for the welfare of others? The least amount of concern. Disconnected family, the indefinite family, the hearer family, the solitary realizer family, or the Mahayana family? 6. Which of the sutra perspective 5 families has the most amount of concern for the welfare of others? Disconnected family, indefinite family, hero family, solitary realizer family, Mahayana family. The most concern. 7. Which of the sutra perspective 5 families is most likely to wind up in whatever family their first teacher is? The one that's easily influenced. Disconnected, indefinite, hearer, solitary realizer, Mahayana. Which of the sutra perspective 5 families are specifically of the foundational vehicle? Choose 2. Disconnected, indefinite, hearer, solitary realizer, Mahayana. Choose 2. Which of the foundational vehicle families is the one with more intelligence and also more arrogance? And the last question, of the 2 kinds of Buddha body, which 2 subdivisions are the ones that are specifically and directly to benefit others? Choose 2. And so when you finish the review, push submit. And it's okay to look in your text. It's however you come to the answer. Again, it's completely anonymous, so I don't know who knows what. The first question is, what categories are talking about the path? And the answer is the 2 accumulations, merit and wisdom. And it looks like 67% of you got that right. Then number 2, what categories are talking about the basis? And the answer is the 2 truths, and 83% of you got that right, which is great. And number 3, what categories of the Buddhist teachings are talking about the result? And 75% of you got that right. So the basis, the path, and the result, I mixed around the order just so that to make it something you had to think about rather than something that was just memorized without the meaning. The basis, the path, and the result. The question is, why are they important to frame in that way? Do you remember why it's important to frame things in that way, or why it's useful to frame things in that way? But what I want you to do is not to be right or wrong, but to engage with the material and think about it deeply, right? I don't really care if you understand what the answer is. What I care about is that you're thinking about it so that you can look at your own way of framing knowledge and framing transformation and looking at how you can take the reins of your own development. So don't feel like you're in school. Okay, it's an exercise, all right? Nobody is grading you. I don't even know who answered what. Where people get hung up is that they mix them together and think that they have to take on board the basis, the path, and the result as if they were one thing. And from a Buddhist perspective, the basis is the thing that we explore and investigate, but we're not really questioning whether it's true or not. Because it's proved by science, it's proved by quantum physics, it's proved by neuroscience. You know, it's not something that we're questioning whether it's right or not. We're more questioning and investigating the depth of it than the details of it. So the basis, the 2 truths, ultimate truth and relative truth, this is just how things exist. Then it becomes your choice whether or not to practice the path. And if you were to practice the path, then it helps to know the way things are categorized, because you practice related to ultimate truth and you practice related to relative truth, right? And those 2 practices look different, especially in the beginning. And it's a question of, are you looking at someone's suffering, someone's potential to be free from suffering, or are you looking at the whole premise of where suffering came from and the ignorance about our existence? What level of depth are you approaching yourself? What level of depth are you approaching others? And then the result of those are the two Buddha bodies, which is the most religious aspect of these three tiers. The bodies of a Buddha, not necessarily in material form, but basically the two things you can do once you've practiced, or the two things you have once you've practiced. So we've gone through it a few times, but there still are some people that aren't quite clear. So if you have any questions, please do ask. The two truths is going to be talked about a lot in your next semester, but the path and the result won't be talked about in the same way for quite a while, particularly the result. So if you have any questions about the result. So number 4, when a Sangha finally saw Maitreya Buddha and received teachings on Buddha potential, what was he doing? And most of you got that. Excellent. So that's great. This, in a way, could be a trick question, although it's not really. B is the answer. But the fact that it became the answer is related to him having done the other things, right? He had to meditate intensely. He had to ask for some sort of intervention. He had to study in order for it to occur to him to show compassion to the dog as well as to the maggots, right? Okay, so 5, from the sutra perspective, which has the least amount of concern for others, the disconnected family. So hopefully the people that thought it was solitary realizer or Mahayana just misunderstood the question, hopefully. And if you didn't, and that's what you thought was true, that's an interesting place of investigation. So ask about that if you'd like. 6, which has the most concern, the Mahayana, everybody got that right. 7, which of the 5 families is most likely to wind up in whatever family their first teacher was? The hearer family. You would think so given the name, but remember it was the indefinite family. It was those who could have gone either way, and they're very easily influenced. Hearers refer to how they study and how they practice. They practice through hearing. So the answer to this one was indefinite family. And then 8, which 2 are of the foundational vehicle, and they are hearers and solitary realizers. Those are the 2 types of specifically foundational vehicle practitioners. 9 of the foundational vehicle families, which one is more intelligent and also more arrogant? Most of you got that right, the solitary realizer family. And then 10 of the 2 kinds of Buddha body, which 2 subdivisions are the ones that specifically and directly benefit others. And we had, some mixture of responses there. I know it's a tricky question, but the answer is B, Sambhogakaya, and D, Nirmanakaya, the enjoyment body and the emanation body. One more question which wouldn't fit, which was in the poll, which was of the 2 kinds of Buddha body, which subdivision is related to our naturally abiding lineage, the Buddha nature that has always been there, and that's the Swabhavikakaya. So this chart that you've seen many times hopefully makes some more sense now. If you look at this chart, does it feel clearer? Is there anything about that whole dividing process that you'd like to ask about? Because it's one of the 2 form bodies, and it's the result of the method side of the path. So the 2 form bodies, the only reason you need a form body is in order to communicate and relate to others. So the enjoyment body is specifically for those practitioners who have achieved some realizations and so are able to get more advanced, more direct teachings, like in a Pure Land. The emanation body is more universal and able to connect with every single kind of sentient being and might take the aspect of a person teaching, or it might take the aspect of a bridge or a boat or something inanimate or your pet or whatever you have the karma for. So enjoyment bodies are more for Arya Bodhisattvas. Emanation bodies are more universal and for everyone. Yeah, so you need both abilities or both types of form body.
Hi, thank you. I think I don't understand why in the method and the wisdom. So the method is to practice tolerance, love and kindness, compassion, and also the way that the mind is has a distortions. It's also this aspect.
Yeah,
Not just love and kindness and compassion.
Yes.
In the method.
So practicing loving kindness and compassion are related to relative truth, related to conventional truth. And the whole premise of relative truth or conventional truth, whichever term you like the best, is that they're all deceptive. Everything that's a relative truth is deceptive.
Okay, so in the deceptive aspect, all the issue of the emptiness is not included in the. For me, it's like included in the deceptive aspect, and I understand that not that the wisdom is the emptiness, and the emptiness is not included.
The wisdom is realizing the emptiness.
Realize, okay. But it's not also, if you understand the deceptive aspect, you don't understand also the emptiness?
Well, of course, we want that to be the case, right? Like ideally, the case is that you practice compassion while remembering emptiness, ideally, right? But we have to understand that we're practicing compassion right now. Even when we remember emptiness, emptiness does not appear to us. Things still seem to be inherently existent, even if we're actively trying not to believe that illusion. We're trying not to believe that illusion that everything is inherently existent. We're trying, but things still appear that way. It still seems like there are good things, good people, bad people. Still seems like that is self-evident from the side of the person or the object. Despite trying to remember that that's not the case, our automatic default response and appearance is illusory. So of course, in terms of practice, you're trying to bring two together, exactly as you say, you're trying, but really when you're accumulating the accumulation of wisdom, it's related specifically to remembering emptiness. When you're accumulating the accumulation of merit, it's related specifically to when you're engaged with deceptive truths, but trying to bring compassion, kindness, etc. to them.
And practically, it's really separated? It's not together?
Well, I love it if it is together, right? Like, I'm very happy if that's how you're already practicing. That's fantastic, and that's what we should all aim for. But if we're thinking about, I don't know, working with someone who's going through suffering, we probably alternate. We probably go back and forth between remembering emptiness, using dependent arising to help us understand emptiness, and then just offering compassion, kindness, acceptance, etc. Then remembering the emptiness, then offering, we're probably alternating. Even just, in 1 hour with one person, we're not holding them simultaneously. We're going back and forth and back and forth. Even if we're silent, even if we're not saying anything. So of course, we want to bring them together. The whole point is to bring them together, but we kind of, mentally isolate them into two categories. Does it make sense? Or, so, I mean, I love that you're immediately bringing them together because of course that's what we should do. But in terms of strategy and understanding systems, it's good to kind of have them as two subcategories because of course they also lead to different results. Yeah. All within one person, right? All within one person. It's not like you wind up then with form bodies over here and wisdom bodies over here. It's all just, mentally categorizing things. Yeah. But I think that in terms of practice, if you're getting stuck, it's helpful to think, What have I been emphasizing? If I've been emphasizing the relative, maybe I need to look at it from the perspective of the ultimate. If I've been emphasizing the ultimate, maybe I need to look at it from the perspective of the relative. Yeah. Sometimes when I get stuck with someone in a conversation, it could go like this. It could be like, I'm trying to tell you about suffering, and the other person is trying to say, no, but look how wonderful things are. Look at all the possibilities. Give yourself a break. Be kind to yourself. And I'm saying, sure, all that goes without saying. That goes without saying. That's obvious. But what I'm trying to tell you about is the suffering. Or it can go the other way. You know, when you get stuck with people, it's usually when one of you is emphasizing something else. So if you take that kind of example and think relative, ultimate, when we get stuck, we're usually forgetting one side. Yeah, and when we talk about spiritual bypassing, it's usually that we're jumping over whatever truth is least comfortable for us in that moment. We're jumping over it and just sticking with one. Yeah, of course, suffering, but look at everything's empty. Right? All right, we do that. We jump straight to the profound and then aren't looking at the suffering in front of us, or only look at the suffering in front of us and don't look at the profound. Do you know? So in terms of practice, if you can just consciously bring in both and acknowledge that you're probably not going to be able to hold both simultaneously. They're going to alternate.
Maybe I'm talking not about the thought, about the experience. Maybe it's confusing me because I'm thinking about the experience aspect. So if I'm thinking about the disruptive aspect, so for me, it's go also to emptiness, maybe something like that in the experience, maybe not in the, you know, just the logical and the.
Yeah. And I'm guessing that most of you, even before you had this framework, were moving between two different ideas. I don't think that you were understanding emptiness per se, but you were probably understanding a level of dependent arising for sure. Just remembering context and history and perspective and the big picture, and, you know, surface level dependent arising is something that you already were looking at before you ever met Buddhism. You're thinking, sure, this person's suffering, and sure, their spouse is difficult, but of course their spouse has their own story and their own reasons, and you can see it from both sides. I mean, that's stuff that you've been doing probably your whole life. It just wasn't framed this way. With emptiness, you're kind of going a level deeper and remembering that none of the appearances exist as they seem. None of them. Not even you and them. Yeah. Yeah, what's not?
Yeah, I think what you said is quite precise, because I think we're constantly thinking about context, constantly. So that is so well linked together, compassion and context. For me, emptiness is still so disconnected that it's still very far away. So the context is here and I feel it. The emptiness is far.
Yeah.
So that's why maybe we don't put it apart, the context and the empathy or the compassion. It's together for us very much.
Yeah, and I think that it's easy to assume that the framework you're hearing is the framework you already know, because dependent arising sounds like context. You think that's the whole story and that's what you've been doing this whole time, and what is the point of this conversation? You already know better. When in fact there's several layers deeper that you're missing out on, because you're assuming that's the whole story because it reminds you of what you know. You know, so when we're looking at context, that is.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I think maybe we relate context to empathy, to compassion. And then when you say emptiness, it's empty. It doesn't relate. So I don't think we think that what you said, we know. We just don't, we take the context to the compassion. And then when you talk about emptiness, it still is not vivid, I think, for me.
Yeah, and it'll take a while. It's hard. You know, it's on one level it's intellectually easy enough to grasp, and on another level it's epically profound. They did introduction to the middle way at the nunnery for 2 years straight, just introduction to the middle way for 2 years. So we do like an airplane, going over the landscape, and at the monasteries, they walk the terrain. So, in going over in an airplane, if there's parts that you're like, ooh, I need to go back to that, hopefully in going over with the airplane, you at least know there's some areas there I'm curious about and I want to drill down into. But when you're looking at context, what we normally do before we meet Buddhism is we look at enough context to trigger compassion, right? If I keep digging, I'll find a place where I can resonate and I can have affinity and my heart can open. And then we leave it at that because that was enough to get us to compassion, which is wonderful and is more than most people do, right? It's more than most people do. They don't even look at the context of things or look at it from the perspective of many other people. So it's wonderful that we at least go that far. But if we can take it even farther to none of the parts of context are self-existent. So we might go down a few layers and say that person is angry because they are suffering. They are suffering because they were neglected. And then you land at neglect equals suffering equals anger, and you're done. As if that's the whole story. Looking at actually many people have had neglect of that exact same type and have had a different response to it, which means it's not self-existently the cause for this and this and this behavior, right? So then you drop down a layer and you say, it's not because of neglect alone that this led to this, led to this. There's something under. Who was identified as the neglected party? How did they frame the concept of it? What were the other things, et cetera, et cetera. So basically it goes into like infinite context, which then releases you into nothing from its own side. It's all just merely labeled by the mind, which means anything is possible, which means everybody's story is false and yet still valid, right? So everybody's story about how they got this way is a fairy story that they've told themselves and reinforced and believed, and yet is still valid and worth loving and cherishing and giving compassion to and holding. Yeah, so if you have ultimate truth without relative truth, it becomes cold and intellectual and without warmth and without seeing the immediacy of, doesn't matter if the story is a fantasy, believing it is giving me real-time suffering. So let's hold space for that suffering to be soothed and then go down layers of the story until we release into infinite possibility.
So basically what you're saying is releasing the story, you slowly get deeper and deeper into layers of what? What is what you describe infinite possibility?
Well, you're going down layers of dependent arising, more and more subtle layers of dependent arising, until your conclusion is nothing exists from its own side. Not nothing, but nothing exists from its own side. And then we immediately cling on to, therefore, there is this story though. I'm just saying it's an empty story, but there's a story though, and we cling on to that as if we've understood emptiness, but we've reverted back to a level of the relative. Even though it's a subtler level and a more useful level of the relative, it's still clinging to the relative. Emptiness is a mere negation. It's not implying anything in its place. Yeah. So it's a space of infinite possibility, but even conceptualizing that can be very scary, because then who is the self? What is experience? And it can be quite scary. And then liberating, but first scary. Because all we've ever known is the pretender self. We haven't even met the relative self, let alone the ultimate self. All we know is layers of facade upon layers of facade, So the less you believe in your own story, the more free and relaxed you're going to be. And yet if you pretend there is no story, you're spiritually bypassing and missing the vividness of the relative truth that we're all sharing and experiencing. So it's only a Buddha that can see relative truth and ultimate truth simultaneously, but at some point we'll be able to see emptiness directly, and that knowledge will help us break the spell when we see the relative. We won't believe it in the same way. Yeah, it's going to take a little while. Don't worry, it's worthwhile, even if you don't understand it perfectly. Even an imperfect understanding starts leading you in the right direction. Yeah, which is releasing negative states of mind, right? That's the whole point, releasing negative states of mind, releasing suffering. You know, the reason we look at it is because it helps you. Yeah, not just because it's a fun intellectual exercise. Okay, so that kind of brings us to the path and kind of how that all goes together. So when you look at these 5 paths, you're basically looking at levels of ultimate truth and relative truth and practicing accordingly. Yeah, so in the beginning, you're mostly accumulating related to the relative. Then with the path of preparation, you're bringing the relative and the ultimate together, and it's still conceptual. Then once you've repeated that enough, it becomes perceptual and direct. You repeat that perceptual direct understanding through the path of meditation and arrive at the path of no more learning. So this is a very brief explanation of the 5 paths, but as you look at it, what comes to mind, things that you've been meaning to ask or things that you found interesting? If you read these sections in italics, it helps you understand the names of each of them. So these paths are all related to method and wisdom both, but in the beginning there's more method, and then there's more union, and then that union becomes more direct, and then emptiness is mostly emphasized. Starting to come clearer, this framework?
I'm very occupied with the movement between the path of preparation to the path of seeing, and I wanted to understand if this transformation is the transformation between the relative to the ultimate, and if so, why is the path of meditation after the path of seeing?
Yeah, it's a good question. The path of meditation, I mean, each of these names are talking about what is emphasized, but meditation is emphasized throughout and before. You know, we're not even on the path of accumulation and we're already emphasizing meditation. We're emphasizing, you know, hearing and study, contemplation and reflection, and then a little bit of meditating to try and get it to sink in. And then we come back to hearing, contemplating, meditating, and go through those cycles again and again until we achieve the path of accumulation, right? And then we continue to do that and continue to do that and continue to do that. But less and less hearing is needed because we've understood now. Now it's just about reflecting and meditating, reflecting and meditating. So on the path of preparation, you're preparing to see emptiness directly. So it is a bit like you described, the movement from relative to ultimate, but it's more like the movement of conceptual to perceptual. Yeah, it's a movement from understanding something with great stability and great clarity and good intellectual understanding, and that moving from getting it to like knowing it. Yeah, getting it to knowing it. And so it's a cognitive shift, for a lack of a better word, but it's really a point where you shift from being able to have single-pointed concentration and analysis together on emptiness, and then that having becomes strong enough that you see emptiness. When you see emptiness directly, then you need to repeat that. And every time you meditate on emptiness on the path of meditation, you're removing eons and eons of negative karma, seeds. You know, you're really clearing, like with a blowtorch, all the negative karmic seeds. Up until then, you're still able to prevent a lot of them from giving rise to future suffering. But once you're on the path of meditation, every time you meditate on emptiness, it is so profound that it's like, you know, centuries and centuries and centuries of negative habits get interrupted and cut. and all of the potential for those to give suffering gets completely eliminated. And so the path of meditation, first you're burning seeds related to, intellectually acquired confusion and innate confusion, or intellectually acquired ignorance and innate ignorance. And then you're getting rid of the imprints of that, which is just the tendency to see things as inherently existent. And when that tendency of those imprints is gone, you have the path of no more learning, you have Buddhahood. So it's called path of meditation basically because you're repeating and meditating what you understood on the path of seeing. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Yönten, it's our last lesson with you today. We wrote something and we want, if it's possible, to read it here now for you.
And here I'm thinking we must pack in as much as we possibly can. We must not waste a session. That is coming, you guys. You can just say thanks and then we'll move on. No. No, but if you prepared something, please proceed. Yes, that's very kind.
So I'll read something to you.
That's very kind. Thank you. And I know it's been a weird semester. It's been just this weird, it's weird. And may we be an instrument of positive change. So there's, I guess the only other section I just wanted to check in with you guys, if you wanted to ask about or review at all, was those 9 analogies. And when you look at those guys, hopefully it's starting to make a bit more sense, especially that last column. Yeah, person specifically obscured by this obscuring factor, this whole column at the very end. This slowly will make more and more sense over time. But basically it's saying at whatever level you're at, there is an ability to pierce through the veil, to move through the problem, to get to the core of things. And having gotten to the core of things, there is always potential for development, whoever you are at whatever stage you are. And so here's just different ways of looking at it through kind of poetic rendering. But if you look at these analogies, did you have any thoughts or questions now that it's had time to sit? Nope, whatever's clear is clear, and whatever isn't clear, and we'll just move on. Is that kind of where you're at with it, I'm guessing? We're gonna dedicate the merit of the semester. So the way that we'll do that is using a prayer of Shanti Deva that a lot of us really love. So if you want to recite it, or if you want to just read it and think of it, we'll use Shanti Deva's dedication. So if you just take a minute and think that you all put a huge amount of effort into trying to understand these things and trying to practice them, especially given that it was an odd circumstance and an odd set of conditions. So think that all of the energy you put into it goes towards these aims. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled, with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then, may I too remain, to dispel the misery of the world.
It's beautiful.
Thanks, guys. So I'll see you tonight for meditation. And if you're curious about retreat things, I'll send you the materials for the retreat. But if you want to get started, you all have this book, The Wheel of Sharp Weapons. So it's the main text that we're going to be using during the retreat. Okay. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.